The problem of inequality is at the heart of many current concerns about social and economic policies all over the world. It is not a passing episode. We have to recognize inequality, find the best ways to mitigate its effects, and focus especially on giving children from disadvantaged homes the best leg up and confidence early in their lives. But let me start with a few basic facts about inequality in Singapore, a few basic facts that are not very well known. First, inequality is not new. It has always been high in Singapore, certainly since the 1980s. We knew it with our eyes, and it is also there in the data. The Gini ratio, which is the most popular way of measuring inequality, was already 0.44 in 1980. For those who are familiar with the Gini, that's a relatively high level of inequality. Inequality has always been inherent in our being a city-state and hub economy, with a concentration of talent and enterprise. It is the same for Hong Kong, as well as for emerging Asian cities like Beijing and Shanghai, both of which are in fact estimated to have higher Gini ratios, like Hong Kong, compared to Singapore. London and many American cities are likewise. However, the fact that we are similar to other cities does not give us comfort, because they are cities in larger countries, whereas Singapore is both a city and a nation. In larger countries, if you do not like living with others in the city, or if it gets too expensive, you move out to the suburbs. In Singapore, we're just MRT stops away from each other. We are therefore taking steps to temper inequality where possible. The second fact is that the rise in inequality did not happen recently. The increase in inequality took place earlier, starting in the late 1990s. The Gini ratio rose significantly after 1998, reaching about 0.48 in 2007. It is now at about the same level that it was then, more than 5 years ago. Rising inequality has hence not been a result of economic growth strategies in recent years. In fact, the greatest setback for those at the lower end of the income ladder took place in the early part of the last decade, during and after the 2001 recession. They saw their incomes fall in real terms and only recover fully a decade later. A third fact is important. Inequality has been accompanied by significant increases in standards of living for most of the population over the years. This was, of course, striking in the initial years of our economic development, but it has continued in the last 2 decades. The bottom 20% of households has seen incomes increase by about 60% in real terms since 1990. Living standards of the median household have in fact doubled. Inequality does not mean that economic policies are failing. There are many parallels for this around the world. If you look at emerging economies, for instance, China has seen a much larger increase in inequality than India in the last 2 decades. But few doubt that the poor in China have seen greater upliftment in living standards than those in India, including better access to the basic amenities of modern life. The anxiety over income disparities is nevertheless real and reflects the new environment that we are in. Incomes are now growing more slowly than they used to, including for the middle class. With slower income growth, people feel less secure about their prospects, and it matters more when some people are doing better than others. It has happened in most of the advanced economies and is happening in the Asian NIEs too. In the advanced economies like the US and Germany and France, the median worker has seen either no growth or an actual decline in real incomes for at least a decade. Wealth, too, has declined. In the US, the median family's net worth fell by more than a quarter over the last decade. In the Asian NIEs, incomes have also begun to slow. Median household incomes in Taiwan have fallen in real terms over the last 10 years. and in Hong Kong have shown minimal growth. In Singapore, we have fortunately had a more significant increase of about 25% in real terms. But the experience of the advanced countries and these other Asian economies, which remain dynamic and competitive in their own way, tells us something about the realities, the tough realities of the global economy. We are all subject to the same global competition and to the revolution in technology that is allowing machines to replace labor increasingly for skilled tasks. The same forces of globalization and technology have come together to provide exceptional rewards for those with certain niche talents and entrepreneurial skills. In fact, the most stark expression of this change in the global economy has been in the Nordic countries. They are generally regarded as the most egalitarian of societies. But they are also small, open economies. And it is in Sweden, Denmark, and Finland that we have seen amongst the sharpest increases in inequality over the last 30 years. Today, Finland and Sweden's Gini ratios are on average about the same as Singapore's, before taking into account taxes and transfers. The workings of the market have resulted in the two countries having levels of inequality in earned income similar to a city-state like Singapore. However, besides globalization, there is another factor that explains the rise in inequality in Singapore. It is the story of the remarkable transformation in educational standards that took place within a generation. I'm in my mid-50s. In my time in primary school, barely 50% of students managed to progress onto secondary school. Of my two best friends in primary school, one did not make it to secondary school, and the other found a place at one of our technical schools. Some of those who failed went on to get training in simple skills at the old Industrial Training Board, or ITB. But almost everyone eventually found jobs in a growing economy. They did whatever work they could: seamstresses, assembly work in our factories, manual work in the shipyards, ports, vehicle workshops, and jobs as peons and delivery workers. Some upgraded over time and their incomes went up, but a large number of those who started with very low education and skills have occupied lower paying jobs throughout their lives. How education has transformed the labor force has been the real drama. If you look at those above 55 today, half of them have no more than primary education. But look at young people between the age of 25 and 34, and the figure is only 2%, from 50% to 2% in 30 years. More than that, a vastly greater proportion of the younger generation has gone beyond school to get a tertiary education, which only a small number obtained 30 years ago. What this means is that the older generation of workers who had low skills and wages for most of their lives and who are part of the developing economy that Singapore was, now find themselves in a developed economy where incomes of younger people are a world apart from what they grew up with. A disproportionate number of middle and higher paying jobs are taken up by younger Singaporeans, while older Singaporeans, those 55 years and above, make up half of those in the bottom 10% of our working population. That's the stark facts of educational demography. This too is why inequality has gone up over the years. Education was transformed not over several generations, as in most countries, but over a single generation, so that we have both low and highly educated cohorts of workers in the workforce at the same time. We are doing more to help these older workers. We are topping up their wages through workfare and providing their employers a subsidy for their wages through a special employment credit. Together, what these two government schemes, workfare and the special employment credit, mean for the older low-wage worker is that we are paying about 40% on top of what his employer is actually paying. But we also want employers themselves to pay more for certain jobs at the bottom of the income ladder. Many of our low-income older citizens do jobs in cleaning or security or traditional work in the retail sector, where wages were stuck at low levels in the previous decade. We are already seeing results through both the Inclusive Growth Program that helps SMEs to upgrade and the progressive wage model that is being championed by the NTUC, which is working in concert with the employer associations and the government. The government's tightening of foreign manpower rules is also keeping the labor market tight, which motivates employers to pay more for these workers. The problem of higher inequality and slowing or stagnating incomes for the majority is testing social systems around the world. Established approaches to economic and social policy are being questioned and new solutions being sought. Socialism as a system of collective ownership and state control of the economy failed a few decades ago. However, at the other end of the spectrum, free market liberalism has lost credibility too in more recent years. The US, which came closest to this liberal model among the advanced economies, has seen a loss of optimism amongst its broad middle class. Less than half of all American parents now think that their children will be better off than them. Social mobility has fallen in the United States to even below the levels in the United Kingdom, which has long had problems in getting upward mobility amongst its poor. The major alternative to free market liberalism has been the European social democratic model. They built the post-war welfare state, which in one variant or another is practiced across Western Europe. That model too has reached its limits and is in retreat. Its future is threatened by three major forces that were not envisaged by the founders of the welfare state. Globalization and the rapid entry of emerging economies like China into the global labor pool has taken away jobs. Secondly, huge advances in life expectancy, remarkable advances in life expectancy over the last 5 decades have not been accompanied by reforms to make welfare systems sustainable. Most European welfare systems are now living on borrowed time and risk putting a huge burden on the next generation. Put another way, while market liberalism has been unable to provide an acceptable degree of fairness and equity amongst today's generation, the welfare states are giving their children's generation an unfair deal. The third factor threatening the welfare state has been equally fundamental. The continuous expansion of social entitlements has reshaped attitudes to work and society in ways never envisioned after the war. Societies which had long been renowned for their industriousness have seen a steady and damaging erosion of the work ethic and increased dependence on state support as the alternative to work. Again, the best way to illustrate this is not to look at the weakest economies, such as those in the Eurozone periphery, but the most successful ones, like Sweden. Despite many years of reforms to entitlement policies, the youth unemployment rate in Sweden is 24% today. Officially, the overall unemployment rate is 8%, but it is estimated to be higher at 20% or more if we count in those who go on disability benefits and retire early, and those on sickness benefits. These are still nations with considerable strengths, accumulated over long periods of time. Their leading companies are between 50 and 100 years old and are world leaders in their fields. But both government and business leaders worry about their future of their workforces and societies, and are talking about the need for further politically painful reforms to secure a good future. We should continue to watch and learn from the experiences of these and other societies as we embark on new directions in social policy in Singapore. There are lessons to be learned, both positive and negative.